Hello, I'm Kevin, Senior Horticulturalist here at the Greenery Garden Home in Heidelberg. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of those plants that may be of problems to your cats and dogs, and that includes indoor and outdoor plants, and just some of the things you need to be wary of. And I'm also going to speak a little bit about the fertilisers and weed killers that you may use that also may cause issues. So stick around and I'll speak to you about all those things. So a lot of us have pets at home, and some of the plants that we can have some potential problems with in the garden are often very commonly planted plants, and people aren't aware necessarily of issues with those plants with your beloved pets. One of the most common, of course, that's used in a lot of gardens here in Melbourne are azaleas. And azaleas can cause issues if the pets, the cat or the dog, were to eat parts of the plant. Some pets are in the habit of chewing leaves, for instance, and in big numbers or big quantities, leaves can be toxic to pets. So we just need to be aware of that. It's not a very common occurrence in the garden with pets eating plants, but potentially there could be problems, and obviously expensive vet bills if they were to eat vast quantities of those plants. So azaleas are a typical plant that may cause issues. There's also the rhododendrons, which are related. They're often grown in a lot of the older traditional type gardens, and if the dog or cat were to gnaw on the leaves or the flowers and eat a fairly large quantity, then there may be problems. Some dogs or cats are not attracted to plants at all. It tends to be often a problem with young puppies and kittens who are exploring their new environment, and then they tend to munch on various different things in the garden. So if you're aware, then you can take precautions, I guess. Another common plant, and very durable plant I might add, are Oleander. And every part of the Oleander plant is toxic. We also need to be conscious of young children playing in the garden. If they're not supervised, for instance, and they happen to pick leaves or pick flowers, then it may cause issues in the mouth or in their throat if they do happen to swallow leaves or flowers. Otherwise, oleander is a very, very tough plant, often used for drought tolerance, larger growing shrub, very decorative summer flowers, a very drought and coastal tolerant plant, and very easy to grow. But do be aware that some parts of the plant may be a problem with cats or dogs, or indeed young children. The foxgloves, which are a very commonly planted spring flowering perennial plant, have poisonous leaves. This is digitalis, and digitalis can be quite toxic if it's consumed in large quantities. Again, it can cause issues with swelling of the throat and mouth after it's consumed, and may cause stomach issues as well. Very decorative plants, and they flower over a long period of time, but just be aware that some plants, if they're in a position in the garden where they're accessible for cats and dogs, they may cause problems. That's foxglove. Another commonly planted and a very old plant in gardens in Melbourne, sometimes used as a ground cover or as a climbing plant, is the common old English ivy. Now, ivy can be an irritant if dogs or cats were to walk through the foliage, if it was used, for instance, as a ground cover. The foliage itself can cause irritations, and if any part of the plant is consumed, again in large quantities, then it may cause problems as well. Very tough plant, ivy. It's a very quick growing, dense climber and ground cover, and looks very effective if used in the right spot in the garden, but can also cause a few issues if you're not aware of it. Sweet peas are commonly planted at this time of the year. I've grabbed this seed packet. I don't have any flowering plants as yet, but sweet pea is that old perfume annual flowering plant, good climbing plant for sunny areas in the garden, quick growing. The leaves can be an issue with cats and dogs as well. And one thing to avoid is maybe planting them in obvious positions where your pets may find them. So some people grow sweet pea in pots or in hanging baskets, and that way you can elevate the plants to keep them out of the way of the cats and dogs. Fantastic perfume on sweet peas, quick growing. They're great on, say, wire fences, or as I mentioned, in hanging baskets or pots. They cascade out of the pots and will give you colour over a very long period of time. But do be aware that they also may have some toxic issues. The old varieties of daylilies are another plant that, particularly in older style gardens, are used. They come in a whole range of colours. There is also the Asiatic lilies, which are often sold as cut flowers in Melbourne from florists, and they're used indoors for vases, for decoration. They have a nice perfume flower, but the flower itself is very toxic to cats, particularly if they consume, the pollen and the flower itself. It can cause a lot of issues. So again, if they're elevated, where the cats or dog can't get to these plants, then they should be okay. But it's good to be aware that some of these plants might cause issues. I just want to mention a little bit about some of the indoor plants that are very commonly used in the home, but potentially again may cause some problems with particularly cats indoors. This is a very tough indoor plant, very hardy, and for that reason it's often used quite commonly around the house. This is Madonna Lilly, or Spathiphyllum. It's grown for its dark green glossy leaves, its white spath type flower, and its tolerance of low light and hardiness inside. But the leaves on this plant can be an issue to cats if they happen to chew on the leaves. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So one way around it, and it's probably easier inside the house than what it is outside, but you can elevate the plants out of the reach of your animals, and obviously that helps to combat the problem of them eating the leaves. But just be aware that the Madonna Lilly, it is used extensively. It's a very popular indoor plant, but if your animal is in the habit of eating plants, then this is one to look out for. Another commonly grown indoor plant, because of its toughness, used a lot in office environments particularly, is the snake plant, or Sansevieria. Very drought tolerant, low light tolerant plant, needs minimal water, but again the foliage can be an issue with particularly cats eating the leaves. And I mean, with any of these plants, they need to be consumed in large quantities to cause a lot of problems, but if they're within easy reach of the animals, then it might be a problem. So just keeping an eye on your cats if you like to grow these plants, or alternatively elevate them where they're out of reach of the cats, where they can't get to them. Otherwise, very decorative, hardy indoor plant. For those of you who don't want to water a lot, then I'd certainly recommend these to you. An older indoor plant that's still available in the nursery here is what they call Dumbcane, or Banksia is the botanical name for it. A very decorative spotty leaf plant. It's called Dumbcane because ingesting some of the sap from the leaves of the plant can cause numbing in the mouth and around the throat area, and that applies obviously to your cats and dogs inside. It is a very hardy indoor plant, very decorative sort of leaf, but again, just be conscious that if the leaves are ingested and in larger quantities, they may cause issues. An alternative to growing these, if you like those indoor plants with the decorative type leaves, is this plant here. It's got that sensational red foliage and colour in the leaf itself. This is an Aglaonema. Again, a very hardy indoor plant. Doesn't like excessive amounts of water. Very easy plant to grow, providing it's getting a reasonable amount of natural light. These are going to grow up to around about probably 60, 70 centimetres high with age. They do produce a flower, but it's mainly grown for its coloured leaves. And if you're worried about, your cat or dog eating the Banksia, then this is a good alternative. In fact, I think the leaves on this are probably more attractive than the Banksia. These aren't toxic at all to animals. So that's called Aglaonema. And there's different coloured varieties of this plant which are all suitable as indoor plants. In warmer climates, of course, these can be grown outside. In areas of Queensland, they're used a lot in the gardens, but in Melbourne, because of our cold winters, then we generally have to grow them as an indoor plant, or indeed in a greenhouse environment. But very, very attractive indoor plant. Of course, we as gardeners love fertilising the garden on a regular basis, and dogs particularly are often attracted to certain types of fertilisers that we may like to use. And sometimes if those fertilisers are ingested, particularly in large quantities, they may cause issues with the dog and a visit to the vet. Dynamic Lifter is a fantastic organic fertiliser that's used extensively in gardens for a range of plants. It's a natural product. It's actually chicken manure based, and the scent of the product, the odour of the product actually attracts dogs if it's used throughout the garden. The dogs are naturally attracted to the odour. And dogs being dogs, some dogs will eat large quantities, other dogs might have a bit of a sniff and move on. But you need to be conscious of them eating large quantities of this particular fertiliser because it may cause problems down the track. One way around it is to actually avoid sprinkling the pellets on the top of the garden where the animal can find them. Sometimes if they're incorporated into the soil around the root system of the plant, then they're less likely to be attracted to it. Obviously burying it dulls the odour, and watering it as well tends to dissolve the product and make it less attractive to the animal. But using it in large quantities on the top of the soil may attract certain animals, particularly puppies, find it attractive because of the strong odour. Another one that's related to Dynamic Lifter, and again a favourite fertiliser, traditional fertiliser, Blood and Bone. Again, made from natural products. It does have an odour, may attract the animal to it, and of course the animal sniffs it and wants to eat it, being a natural product, and that's where problems can occur. So again, this one being a powder probably dissolves a bit faster in the soil. So it's always good practice when you do apply fertilisers to water them in That obviously dissolves the fertiliser and makes it less attractive to the animal. Digging in is probably beneficial if you are worried about the animals eating the product. So any of those strong odour fertilisers are probably ones to be aware of. On the downside of it, a lot of people love using natural products in the garden these days. They're avoiding chemical fertilisers for obvious reasons. The chemical fertilisers don't generally have an odour, but can be a nuisance if they're applied and not watered in, and the animal tends to walk on the garden. If the soil's wet or the fertiliser's slightly damp, they can pick it up on their paws as they walk through it, and if they happen to lick their paws afterwards, then that also can cause issues. So it's just a matter of being aware of fertilising when you are doing the garden. Some people choose to use liquid fertilisers because there's no residual product left on the soil after it's applied. Liquid fertilisers obviously are watered in, being soluble, and they dissolve into the soil fairly quickly. So that's one way around it if you were worried about using any of these other types of fertilisers. In a lawn situation, a lot of the weed killers that we use in lawns are chemicals, and we often get asked the question, you know, what do I do if I have a dog or a cat and it's running around on the back lawn and I want to use a weed killer? One of the common sense things to do is keep the animals off the area after you apply the chemical, and make sure that the chemicals are watered in according to the directions after they're applied. Obviously, if the dogs or the cat are allowed to run straight on the lawn after you apply a weed killer, again, they can pick up the chemical on their paws, and that may cause issues. It's just a matter of being aware of what the chemical potentially can do. Once they're dissolved into the soil after they're watered in, then they're not likely to cause any problems with your pets. So just be aware of what you're doing. Apply them on the appropriate weather day. Keep the animals off the area while you're applying any of the chemicals, just to play it safe. Roundup is another common weed killer for garden beds or paved areas, and the beauty of Roundup is it does kill whatever it comes in contact with, so it's a very effective weed killer. But again, we get asked the question, what happens if the dogs or cats walk on it after it's applied? Then there's a risk of it being picked up on the paws, like I mentioned before. So whenever you spray something like Roundup, you pick a good weather day, no likelihood of rain. A warm sunny day is probably ideal because the chemical dries very quickly, and the dog or the cat can be allowed back onto the area after it's dry. Don't let them onto the area immediately after you've applied it, because for obvious reasons they can walk on it and pick it up on their fur or their paws. Roundup it breaks down as soon as it comes in contact with the soil, so it's not a residual weed killer that's going to stay in the soil if the dog or the cat happen to be walking through that area at a later date. It's just while it's being applied until it's dry that there may be issues. So it's just a matter of being aware of those things when you are applying them, and that goes through any weed killers or chemicals that you may be using around the garden. I've mentioned a little bit about some of the outdoor plants. There are many outdoor plants that are more irritant to the fur or the skin of the animal. There's a plant called Tradescantia, and it can be a bit of a nuisance weed in gardens, particularly older gardens in Melbourne. Tradescantia can cause skin issues with a lot of dogs particularly, and often it needs a visit to the vet to remedy the situation. So look out for Tradescantia. It's a very quick growing, dense ground cover, often invades from surrounding gardens, and naturalises very quickly into shaded areas under trees, for instance. But can be quite an irritant to dogs and cats. There's also things like daffodils, tulips, which particularly the bulbs of those plants may be toxic to animals. So I would probably recommend planting them into pots if you want to grow tulips or daffodils, and keeping them out of the reach of dogs or cats, because if they were to ingest them, then they can also cause issues. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you've got a few pointers out of this video. If you like what I was talking about, feel free to subscribe to our video channel. If you have particular questions that you might like to ask regarding some of the plants that may be potentially an issue with cats or dogs, then feel free to email us, or you can come into the store, and any of the horticultural staff here are happy to assist you. We're open 6.5 days a week, and we'd love to see you in the store. So thanks again for watching.